for those people who are kind of unfamiliar with the Krays, can you just give us a little bit of a background about them?
Yeah, well, the Krays were gangsters in London in the 1960s, and rode that wave of London in the 60s until almost the end of the 60s when they went to prison, and it all came to an end for everybody. But they're very interesting because not a lot's been written about them, but there's very little that you can actually pin down about them and know about them. So it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. So for Tom, for you, what was it? Were they on your radar? Was it something that Brian just came to you and said, "Here's this great script"? Tell me how it came to you.
They were always on my radar because there's an abundance of information and sort of iconography about them in London, and as folklore history, the Kray Twins are as synonymous with crime as sort of Bill Sikes is with Dickensian London, you know, in the real world. But their myths are not dissimilar. You know, there's a lot of fiction about them, as well as, you know, basic facts like when they went to prison and, you know, where they lived, and we all know they loved their mum and stuff like that. But there was sort of national treasure in some aspect on a sort of darker note, as it were, within the criminal infrastructure and historic figures. You know, so I knew of them. And it was just a question of when a film would come up about them, I suppose, for this decade or this generation, and it coming through Working Title and having been penned by Brian Helgeland was something which automatically made it something that wasn't going to be a salacious, sensational and sort of daft movie about glamorizing criminals and waffle. So it was something that was technically going to be exciting and had been written with somebody who cared about telling stories, and it was a very fertile piece of real estate that came to the door. So definitely something I wanted to do and play both brothers as well. And all that sort of stuff. So shut up, Tom.
So you decide. No,
Shut up,
it's good.
Tom, shut up.
So Brian, you decide.
I've been drinking.
Tom Hardy's going to play both brothers. How do you know? Well, not even how did you know he was going to pull off? We knew he was going to. He's an amazing actor, okay? But how do you pull that off? How do you know he was going to come through for you so well?
Yeah, well, you always think everyone knows how to do their job, really. I do, you know, and he did. I went to him to play Reggie, and we met over truffle French fries or something like that.
You do.
And often is the case with men getting together, having some truffle French fries. And I asked him to play Reggie, and he wanted to play Ron. And at the end of the whole, by the time the plate was cleared, he said, "Look, give me Reggie, and I'll give you Ron." And we went from there.
So I'm watching this performance, and I'm thinking, who on earth was more challenging or harder to play?
But actually, in hindsight, both. But my initial response was if I had to choose one brother, because that's how it was laid out in the first place, I automatically gravitated towards Ron because there was more. It was much more freedom to play with there as a performer. In hindsight, I had to be a bit more careful with Ron because there's a way of lambasting or being cartoonish, or to an extent where you miss the point of the clown effort. Is not to joke about things, but to create a certain level of humour whereby people laugh along and then don't realise that what they're laughing at is not something that's funny at all. It's incredibly serious. So the balance was something that was specific in experience, like looking back, experiential hindsight-wise. But Reggie was harder to play because he navigates terrain with a veneer which hides his interior landscape. And for the majority of the film, he's portrayed, you know, as a heroic lead in romantic sort of hero, which didn't sit entirely with my understanding of that world. One has to be very careful, I think, you know, when with the balancing out between real people and a movie or a film or a tale based on real people. So it was a tricky terrain to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. You're watching it, and I honestly believe that I'm watching two separate actors. And
Lucky.
For you,
I got lucky.
Well, I want to know. I mean, how hard is it to turn off one, turn on the other? Like, what was the process?
That's very easy. The application is very easy. The due diligence prior preparation and deciding and signing off with Brian how they would look and what differentiate the two guys, silhouette-wise, vocal landscape, physical landscape with costume and makeup and all the effects. And then how technically to shoot them. You know, once we got through, you know, chewed our way through all of that, which was quite daunting to be fair. It became a practical application of slow method, and then became really good fun when we committed to doing it.
Yeah.
Trying to solve that puzzle on a daily basis to make it more seamless and stuff like that and alive.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, Tom had to come on board the technical side of it in a way an actor doesn't usually have to. Beyond, here's a green screen and someday there's going to be a spaceship up there. It's not there right now, but he had to imagine, instead of a spaceship, he had to imagine the actor that was across from him. And there were all kinds of things to help, and he had a great body double, Jacob, who came in, but at the end of the day, he still had to conjure up the other side of the equation.
Yeah, but actually it helps because I know how I will respond at least.
Yeah.
So that cut to that quick in some aspects of that. What options would I give myself based on how I've read both characters come to the day? So that wasn't, but it was how to make that alive.
Yeah.
So it didn't become a gimmick, which is what we kind of not struggled with, but that was a lot of the effort on the day was, and then I had to incorporate our ensemble and our team so that it was alive for everybody, and not again fall into the gimmick.
And as much as we planned it ahead of time, there was always something that would come up that you wouldn't think of. So we were always learning it as we went along and incorporating new things as we learned what we could do and how far we could go with it. We'd incorporate it the next day and the next day and the next day. And
It'd be good to do it again now.
Yeah,
Now knowing what we know, what's possible.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary, but the scene that just blew me away was, well, there was two, like when you get up and you're touching each other's knees, which I thought was so cool, but the fight scene, like, were you exhausted?
Yeah, but it was such a great. It was so full on. Everyone's putting in their input on how to make this illusion work,
Right.
and there were so many opportunities there to obviously fall apart, and you see behind the curtain that it's not it's the same person, etc. So, and shooting anything moving when you've got to, if you've got a static shot of the brothers talking to one another, it's obviously going to be slightly more simple, you'd have thought, apart from eye lines, whenever they're in the same room. But to have them moving and constantly interacting, that was a bit off-piste.
Yeah.
Good fun.
Very quickly, I just have to ask you about Emily Browning, just working with her, what it was like to work with
She's
her.
fantastic, and I think arguably she had the hardest job out of all of us in the acting department to do, because she's the sobering and most honest, in many ways grounding character in the piece, who we see through her eyes, and ultimately gets caught between these two, in a triangle between these two chaotic characters who are deeply dysfunctional, and she's part of that, but her story is much more, she's the most human, I feel, element of the piece, and key.